So are you guys getting this outline yet? If not, work on it. I promise it'll pay off eventually. Remember, we started with a prologue where we learned that sin is the big problem in the world. And then God begins to build the foundation for the gospel. And this starts in scene 1 with the promise of a great nation, which he gives in step 1 to the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and we see the foundation of faith that they give us. Then in step 2, the 12 tribes, we begin to see this promise grow slowly and in a dysfunctional way. And then in step 3, we see them multiply, but now they're in Egypt. And in step 4, God gives them a leader, and his name was Moses, even though he was reluctant. In step 5, God brings them out of Egypt, and we see how even in the plagues and the parting of the Red Sea that God chose people to be his hands. And he's still doing that today. Now today we're going to be moving on to steps 6 and 7. It's important here to remember that part of God's promise to Abraham in Genesis 12 was to bring a blessing to everyone on earth. This blessing will come through a person, Jesus, who will be born into a certain people group in a certain nation. So God also promises that he will create this people, this nation. A nation needs an identity, a way of life. This is especially true since the world is living with the reality of ingrained sin in all of us. So God now begins to create this way of life by giving Moses the law. He wants his people to live a certain way. He does not want them to be like the other nations who do not know him. Remember in the prologue how we noticed that sin puts us out of harmony with God, the world, other people, and even ourselves? Well, as you look at the heart of God's laws, what we see is a structure that will help us live in greater harmony with our neighbors and with God. Now, personally, I think that when looking at God's law as a way of helping us function more closely in line with God's heart, and in opposition to the oppressive laws of the surrounding nations at that time, they tend to make a lot more sense. Maybe you'll look at some of the laws in your classes today. Now, unfortunately, it's not long at all after these laws are given that some things take a horrible turn. God lays out his promises for the people, if only they will continue to see themselves as God's hands, as Moses did by stretching out his hand during the plagues and parting the Red Sea. But they refuse to trust God enough to step into the blessings that he has laid before them. And not only that, but they become chronic complainers, accusing Moses of horrible things and preferring to return to the oppression they had cried out to God for deliverance from for centuries. I mean, you could look at the specifics of some of these stories in your classes, but I wonder, are we much different today? God has laid out some glorious promises before you and called you to obedience in order to experience them. Does your response to God's promises reveal a heart that is more ready to trust God or to refuse to believe him? Are the choices you are making showing others how you will follow God no matter what, or that you will only listen to God when his ways appeal to your own desires? I'm always astonished when I look at the wandering Israelites and how quick they were to forget what God had shown them and deny what God had told them. Yet, God has shown me much, and in his word has clearly communicated many things. Am I really doing much better? There are promises that we may not see unless we respond in obedience. I wonder how much of God I have missed because of my disobedience. Thankfully, there is a promise that does not require my obedience: salvation. This promise is only based on Jesus' work and revealed in me when I believe, not obey. Now, while you lean on this rock-solid promise of salvation, can you help one another to trust God more and follow him with greater consistency? doing this together is a lot easier. We weren't meant to do this alone. We need each other.